Hi, today I want to do a more in-depth training on workflow automations. You can see with workflows, you can put together, complicated, essentially drip campaigns that are chained together that can include SMS text, ringless voicemail messages, MMS messages with pictures, and email, all in one campaign that goes out at a set interval that you determine. And when you add people to your list, they're automatically enrolled in a workflow that you've associated with the list, and it'll automatically start their drip campaign. So let's start at the beginning. To get to your workflows, you need to click on this left menu navigation, which is the workflow automation screen. And in here, you'll see all of your workflows. And I'm just going to create one from scratch. Okay, so you give it a name, and that name could be whatever you want. My test workflow. And you can choose to make this a template if you would want to use this as a template for future workflows. You could just turn on this little indicator here. I'm not going to do that. You can then, if you wanted to use a template to create this, you could select a workflow that you've already made a template, and basically it'll copy all the workflow events, the whole drip campaign, into the workflow. But I'm not going to do that. The start date, this is when you want it to start. Or sooner than you want it to start. I typically recommend just, start it immediately. So I'm just gonna, pick immediate date that I, right now, even though I haven't even created it yet, that's perfectly fine. And then you pick your list. Okay, what list do you want associated with it, right? So I'm gonna pick new list one. And you could, if you didn't want to do a list, you can also do or tags. I could list, tags instead of a list, but I don't want to do that. I want to pick a list so that when people get added into a list, they automatically start this workflow. Now, the rest of this is optional, but you can also choose what to do with the contact after they've completed the workflow. Do you want them removed from the list? If so, turn this on. Do you want them assigned to a new list? Maybe you want them, removed from list one and assigned to list two. That's perfectly fine, right? And list two may start a different workflow, right? So also, do not send after, or sorry, do not send before. So send after, do not send before 8 a.m. and send before, or do not send after 10 p.m. Okay, now these, by default, the system uses 6 a.m. and 11 p.m. But if you want to adjust these, you certainly can. Basically, it would only typically kick in if you either ran out of credits and then added more potentially late at night, or a campaign didn't complete. Maybe it started at 9 o'clock, but it didn't complete, before the 11 o'clock cutoff. Then it would, kick off again the next morning at 6 a.m., which may be too early. And this is in your time zone, right? So if you're in Eastern time zone, you need to be aware that you may have customers in Hawaii, for example, or Pacific time. So you typically want to set up your workflow to accommodate all the time zones that you're interested in. You can also disable it on weekends. So if you don't want anybody to get messages on weekend, just flip that. Typically, I just recommend, leave it as is, and you hit save. Okay, so now you can see we have the My Test workflow right here. You can see it's not a template. It's associated to this list that I have already created under my list and it already has contacts in it, but it doesn't have to. You can see it's in a non-published state. If I wanted to edit it again, I click on the little pencils and I can edit it again. Now, if I want to go into the workflow to start adding stuff, I click on the name of the workflow, and that takes me into the workflow. And this is where I can start building it out. So maybe I want to say text 1. I give you a little message here. You can insert tags like their first name. If you want to know all the personalization tags, just click on this little question mark and it'll take you to the help page. You can insert their first name, last name, address, any of their contact record fields. Now, a person inside of who's getting messages from a workflow, you can let them know. You can remove this message, obviously, but if you want, you can let them know that they can type the word remove and text that back. If they just text back the word remove, they'll be unsubscribed from this workflow. Okay. If they reply with the word stop, just like any campaign, they're going to be opted out of all future text messages from you. So just you got the extra word of remove that you can use. Now, if you want it to go out immediately, as soon as someone's added to a list, now someone could opt into a keyword and that adds them to a list, or you manually import them and add them into a list, or you manually add one contact to a list. Doesn't matter how they get on the list. As soon as they get on the list, this is going to fire, right? Now, do you want it immediately? If you want it immediately when they're added to the list, then you want to do 0 days. I typically do days instead of hours or weeks, but you know, you could do either one. Now, and it's not going to go out before, even though it's 0 days, that means today, but you may say, I don't want it to go out before 2 p.m. Right. So if you don't want that, you want to say, you know, if someone gets added to the list, it can go out at 12 or 9 a.m. You could change it to that if you want, right? You can add a picture. Or if you could say, I want it to go out 1 day after, you know, someone gets added to the list. That's perfectly fine. So I'm going to hit save. And then it tells you it was successfully saved, but don't forget to hit publish when you're done with all your changes. Okay, so you can see the publish button there. That's what's actually going to start this workflow. Okay, now we're going to hold off on publishing because maybe we want to add a ringless voicemail message. Here you can actually, you know, use the ringless voicemail functionality to call this number, enter your PIN number, and then you record a message, and then you can get the audio. The get audio button always retrieves the latest message. And maybe I want this to go out 1 day or maybe 3 days. How about 3 days after the first message? And you can even specify a caller ID, which is optional. If you don't specify that, it'll use your TextP2P number. And I'm going to hit save. Okay, so now we have 2 messages. This goes out 1 day after a person gets added to the list. This goes out 3 days after this message was sent. And now I'm going to add an email. Works the same way. The event title, again, only you see that. This is the title of the message, and you can even use tags in the title. Maybe again, I want this to go out 3 days afterwards, and you know, right here, I could you can use tags, of course, in the body of your email, and make sure you leave the footer on and just hit save. Okay, so it's that easy. I've just built out a workflow of 3 events. And just to let you know, this little indicator over here is the number of pending messages that you have, and you currently don't have any pending. But now let's say I'm ready for it to go. I'm going to hit the publish button. This little box right here says restart entire workflow for all contacts. And this is, let's say you had already published and you've gotten halfway through the workflow and you just want to restart it for every single person, you know, even people who have gotten the first a couple of messages, you want them to start over, you could check this box. Typically, you don't want to do that. Once a person has received a workflow message, you don't want them to ever receive it again. So just leave this unchecked most of the time. And when you publish, it'll send you an email, which I just got the email, and it'll tell you that it's completed. Okay, so if you had a really complex workflow with lots of nodes and 10,000 contacts, it could take an hour or more. But a simple workflow with not many contacts, it won't take but a second to publish. Now, once it's published, one important thing is if you wanted to modify the message, again, you could just come right in here. You could click on the name of the event, and that'll allow you to edit that particular event. One thing else that I'll show you is you have these inserts. So if you wanted to insert a text message before this message, you can do that. If you wanted to rearrange, you can move them up and down. You could delete right here by clicking on this little menu item. Now, messages, this is important because this shows you all the people that are scheduled to get messages, or if they've already received messages. So you could see right here, I have 2 contacts that were in my list, Susie and myself. And both of these you can see are in a pending status, and you can see that it's scheduled to go out tomorrow at 12 o'clock. Okay. So again, if we go to the workflow screen, we come back into the workflow, and you can see, right, it was scheduled to go out one day after today. Today is the 26th, so it's going to go out on the 27th at 12 o'clock right here, 12 o'clock. And you can see that's when it was scheduled. Now, if we could do the same thing with this one. We can see it's going to go out 3 days after the 27th, which would be 1:30 at 2 o'clock. And hit back, and the email is going to go out 3 days after that. And so 2/2. So and you can see everything is in a pending status. Now, once it starts sending, if I go back, now you can see this message has a 2, this one has a 2, this one has 2. So you can quickly see how many are still in a pending, right? And after this sends, you could, if you wanted to see, did the person actually receive it? Was it delivered? Did they have an error? Was their handset not reachable? You could go back into the message and the status, if it was a failure, if it's a landline, whatever, it'll tell you right here. And the reason failed to deliver because. So if you wanted to, check, did, maybe so-and-so said, oh, they didn't get the message, you could always go back into messages, and you can see all of your sent messages as well. Now, if you say, oh, I want to make a change to this message, that's perfectly fine. I forgot to sign my name, and then. And by the way, if you test, just like with campaigns, it'll just send it to yourself, the email or the number that's on the account. But if I want to hit save now, it says that it was saved, but don't forget to republish, because that change will not be visible to users until you publish again. So I'm just going to hit publish again, and now it's been published again. And again, you can come back in, you can check your messages. It's still scheduled for the 2nd, no change there. Go back into the workflow. If you want to do the unpublish button, what that'll do is anybody that's pending will get deleted. It'll just stop all pending messages, and it will put it into a non-published status. Okay, so if you say, oh, I want to stop this workflow for everyone, that's when you do an unpublish. Okay, if you just want to make a change, you don't have to do an unpublish. You just click on the event and make your change. Finally, you have your export and your import buttons here. Those will, if you wanted to export this whole chain and give it to a teammate or a friend, you can do that. You can export it, or it'll create a CSV file which you could look at in Excel if you wanted to. And then you could just give that CSV file to your friend or colleague, and they could import it into their account by just clicking the import button. Just to let you know, you could import it into another workflow if you wanted to. So if you didn't think in advance, oh, I forgot to make this one a template and I want to use it as a template, that's okay. Just export it and import it into a different workflow. That's perfectly fine. So, now our workflow is all set up. It's in a published status. Again, if I want to add another member to start getting this workflow, all I do is I go to the list. I find the list that I want, which is the new list 1. I find that list. I go into it, and I could just add a contact, right? I could just add a contact right into this list. Oops, I lost the list. Let me go back. This list of 4 people. If I wanted to add a contact, I could also import contacts into this list. And once people are added to this list, they'll automatically start that workflow. So that's everything there is to workflows. You could also, of course, set up keywords, as I mentioned. You could have a new customer keyword, or, typically I like to keep them to one word. They can be a phrase, but whatever, blah, right? If someone texts the word blah to your number, they get assigned to list 1 and they get back this message. And you could even ask for their name and their email address, but they'll get back this message immediately, but then because they're associated to that list, they'll automatically start the workflow for that list. And so the next day, because 1 day delay right here, is when they'll get the first message. If I want it to be immediate, I just make the delay 0, and now they'll get this message immediately. And of course, republish. That's it. If you have any questions, you could always check out the help page or email support@textp2p.com.